Manual transmission test 3C, and the stuff that we just watched there is going to give you a lot better understanding. Transmission gear sets can do everything except what? Can they? Huh? Can they multiply torque and decrease speed? Can they increase speed and increase torque at the same time?
No.
No, they cannot. Okay. There you go. Okay. What about, what must be done in order to get the output gear to rotate in the same direction as the input gear? I said it earlier.
Helical gears?
No, you got to add a third gear.
That was going to be my next guess.
Right, Bobby. All right.
Wow. He went there.
Which of the following is a disadvantage of helical gears?
Can be used for reverse.
They cannot slide into and out of contact with each other.
I know that.
Spur gears, which aren't helical cut, can, and your reverse gear is typically a spur gear because it actually moves in and out of contact. Let's see, which of the following types of gears used for side gears in a manual transaxle?
Helical gears. No, high point gears.
Excuse me? Side gears.
Dadgummit. Wait a minute, what?
What?
Huh?
This is the gears we're talking about that are the side gears. See the side gears? The side gears are the ones that actually going out to your axles. Now, what do they look like? I would say if I just looked at these, I would say these are spur bevel gears.
Spur bevel gear.
Yeah, they're not helical cut, and they're bevels, right? Okay. A driving gear has 20 teeth and is turned into 20 foot-pounds of torque. The gear it's driving has 100 teeth. How much torque is the driven gear producing, Quincy? Quincy, do the math, buddy. Come on. A driving gear has 20 teeth and is turning a gear and turning with 20 foot-pounds of torque. The gear it's driving has 100 teeth.
You can't do it.
So what do you come up with? Come on, Quincy, math whiz, make it happen, buddy. Can you do it? Huh? C, 100 foot-pounds. Very good. Okay, what type of gear is represented by a gear ratio of 0.69 to 1?
Reverse.
Please.
Overdrive.
Overdrive. Making it up as he goes. Okay, to determine the total gear ratio of the entire drive line, what should you do?
Multiply the gear ratios together.
All the gear ratios together? My goodness, that's complicated, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow, what if that thing's a 6-speed? You're gonna multiply all those together?
Start multiplying.
You're gonna, whatever gear you're in is the only one you can use when you're doing this. What happens if you put a manual transmission in 2 gears at once?
Ow.
It locks up,
Yeah.
totally locks up. And on those funky Road Ranger transmissions that Eddie teaches down in Diesel, if you don't time those gears, they'll turn a few rounds and lock up. I mean, they have to be timed. You wouldn't know it, you would be looking at them, you know. And it's real peculiar how those things are put together. One of the things he was saying, and y'all will probably run into that in here too, he says, I can tell those guys how all these gears and everything work, but when I get them out there and they start taking a transmission apart, they cry and walk away. It takes somebody that's really a special kind of person that wants to do transmissions, you know, and all that. But you guys are supposed to learn that while you're in here, so I'm gonna bust your chops. Okay. A gear ratio is a term that describes what?
The driver gear to the driven gear.
You know, the difference is in the number of teeth on gears in mesh, right? So what's the gear ratio between the starter gear on that Cadillac and the flywheel?
Wow. We're looking at what, like 8 to 100?
Yeah, it's like 14 to 1 or something like that. Okay. Number 9, the main advantage of helical gears are what? They operate much more quietly and stronger than spur gears. That's what the deal is. Now, let me ask you this. What if I told you, based on what you learned today and looking at that thing, that I've got, and you're going to run into this sooner or later, somebody comes in here and they've got a manual transmission and they say, this thing makes noise in every gear except fourth. And it's just, when you put it in fourth, it's quiet. But in all the other gears, it makes noise. what's the difference between fourth and all the other gears?
Well, the other gear's on this side, fourth gear's on this side.
The input shaft bearing is not loaded when you're in fourth.
'Cause it's the one
So that has to be, at the very least, the input shaft bearing's bad. Now, what will happen is if somebody has a transmission fluid leak and they don't fix it, sooner or later that thing goes low. And which two gears are always turning in mesh all the time? You got the cluster gear, you got the input shaft gear, right? Those are actually, the load is actually being transmitted from the input shaft gear to the cluster gear, and it goes other places. That gear and the bearings in the front of that transmission are going to be the first ones to fail if it runs low on wall. And now sometimes the input shaft bearing, I was working on an RX-7 when I was at the Mazda dealership back in '83, and it was one of those, it was wang, wang, wang. And what was funny was I pulled that transmission out of there, and you know the gear grease has got the gears all greasy and everything. And I just pulled the transmission out and I pulled the back cover off and I put it over there in the area where we do our steam cleaning. And I just stuck the steam cleaner down in there and let it boil, and because it's a manual transmission, all it is gears and bearing, And when you get through, the darn thing is really super hot. It's so hot you can't even touch it. And what happens? The water steams off of it, and the gears are dry, and everything's clean, and you're working with clean gears. You know what I mean?
Wow.
I mean, that was a smart way to do it because I had to pull that bearing out of the front and replace it. And the older guy that had been there, he says, "I've been in this business a long time, and I've never seen anybody clean a transmission with water." I said, "What does it hurt? Tell me." Well, he really couldn't answer that, but for some reason he took exception to that. Yeah.
As long as it gets hot enough to boil them out.
Oh yeah, it gets hot enough. It's gonna cook that water right out of there. The steam goes away. There ain't a drop of water nowhere.
That's
Because
the only thing I'd be worried about.
it was-
Water left in there.
Well, I mean, not really, because it's just gears anyhow. So long and short of it. Okay.
The FC model?
Huh?
FC model you're working on? Like the FB, the FC, and FD? So
Oh, that was back in the early '80s. I mean, all I knew when I came in there, it was an RX-7, rotary engine RX-7, all that. So I was not really, I don't even remember, But I know the ad for those RX-8s had a picture of an RX-8 with lightning everywhere, and it said "lightning in a world of thunder." Because they don't make a lot of noise, but they're fast. What I mean? So, spur gears are primarily used in for what in a manual transmission? I said something earlier about that. Come on, you could pick it up.
Side gears?
Uh-huh.
Side gears?
No, in a manual transmission, you don't have side gears.
I'm talking about the wheels.
What about reverse? And that reverse gear. How many of you, when you're driving? Have you ever noticed? Listen to this now. When you're driving a manual transmission, even if you're used to driving it, and you go to put it in reverse, sometimes the gear just boom, and then you got to let off the clutch a little bit and let things move before it'll drop in. That's because it's a spur gear. And that spur gear is actually moving in mesh with another one. All right, now we're going to jump up to manual transmission test 4. Tapered roller bearings on on the ends of the shafts absorb radial and thrust forces.
True.
That's true. Gear position is determined by which gear is locked to the main shaft. That's what we were talking about just 2 minutes ago when we were looking at that video. Adjustments to the shift linkage may be made with the transmission in low gear or neutral. No, that's actually false. Right. Synchronizer rings may have grooves of friction material on the inside circumference. Now, let me talk for just a minute about synchronizer rings. Do you know about those? What can you tell me about synchronizer rings? Some we call them the blocker rings, and sometimes they're brass, and sometimes they're, cast iron or something. But they are cone-shaped on the inside, slightly cone-shaped, and the place where they ride has got a cone shape that matches them. Now on the inside of that synchronizer, that blocker ring, and it moves, flops around, and I can show you one on those transmissions over there, and we'll get to that eventually. You're basically wanting this thing to go onto that, whenever you're putting it in there, that synchronizer ring is pushed against that cone surface, and you want these grooves or this friction material on the inside of this blocker ring to grab that cone-shaped part of that gear and bring it up to the same speed as the synchronizer so that it slides in without going brrrr, you don't want it grinding. Yeah, and whenever you're downshifting, and you've heard whenever you're downshifting, if you're downshifting pretty aggressively, you'll hear it go wing, doom. You hear that noise when you're downshifting? You know, not when you're upshifting, but when you're downshifting. Like if you're driving along in fourth and you decide you're going to run it back up into third so you can use engine braking a little bit, you mash your brake, you shove it over there, and what's happening is that synchronizer collar slides over, pushes that little blocker ring up against the gear that's not turning as fast, and that gear's got to pick up speed, you know, so that this is all bringing that to pass. Those internal part, that cone shaped inside of that blocker ring, has got to grab the cone on the gear that it's interacting with, and it's going to speed that gear up because everything is turning it faster than the gear that you're going, and you'll hear it go and drop in there. Now, how many of you guys have ever horsed around with a manual transmission without even touching the clutch and just boom, 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 boom? We play around with that, you know. And we used to do that all the time.
Done that like a few times.
Yeah, and if you're a truck driver and you're driving one of these transmissions that's got gears that aren't synchronized, you watch the tachometer and you double clutch and you do all kinds of stuff you do the synchronizing yourself. And that's why it's really hard to learn how to be a truck driver to shift gears with them big old transmissions like we had, you know. All right, so it's number 4 is true. Side bearing preload is measured with an inch-pound torque wrench and a tool that fits over the pinion shaft. That's right. You're going to measure preload. You're going to see how much effort it takes to turn it whenever it's dry with no oil on it. Although they're not very economical, mechanical or cable linkages are used in most manual transaxles because they're reliable. That is false.
What?
You know, Toyota uses cable for some of theirs. Gear and gear sets on manual transaxles are similar to rear wheel drive manual synchro mesh transmissions. That is 7. That's false. All transaxle models have the same disassembly procedure. Now that's a bunch of hooey. When assembling a transaxle, rotate the side gears at least 1 full revolution prior to measuring backlash. This ensures the gears are firmly seated. Who can tell me what backlash is?
Isn't that whenever a gear shifts in the plane, it's not supposed to be?
No, I know what you're kind of thinking there, but backlash is basically how much space there is between the gears. Yeah, exactly. That's right. Think.
Yeah.
All right. You measure that with a dial indicator typically. For proper transaxle maintenance, manufacturers recommend changing the lubricant only if it becomes contaminated. That is true. What's the difference between the automatic transmission fluid and an automatic transmission and manual transmission fluid? Manual transmission fluid is
Gear oil.
yes, gears and oil. But on automatic transmission fluid, if you're pulling a heavy load with an automatic transmission, the fluid properties start to change and it gets all gummy and stinky and starts to cause valves to stick and everything. That's why if you're pulling something really heavy with your pickup or whatever, and you know, and for whatever reason you're having to drag a heavy vehicle with it, you need to be thinking about changing that transmission fluid pretty quick after you do that. Yeah. 2 advantages of using a transaxle are what? Transaxle being front wheel drive. A good vehicle balance and efficient design for better space utilization. B, easy accessibility for repairs and improved front tire wear. Is either one of those correct?
No.
No.
Efficient design for better space utilization and easy accessibility for repairs.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true either. Improved traction and improved front tire wear.
Yeah.
No. Good vehicle balance and efficient design for better space utilization.
Well, that's
Let me ask you this. I'm on my Camaro or my Mustang or whatever, and I'm really getting on it and taking off. What's going on? The engine in the front is trying to twist the frame, right? I mean, yeah, it's on motor mouth, but it's trying to twist the frame. The rear axle back here is trying to roll this way. So you're twisting this way and you're twisting that way, and there's no wonder when Joe Johnson with his hot rod has been driving around, he's got a rattler and a squeaker because all of this stuff tries to get loose whenever you're really getting on it all the time. But if I've got a front wheel drive, the only stress that's being put on anything is here in the front. See what I mean? So it's basically a better deal. The engine pulls back, the wheels go forward, and there's just, it's just a better design all the way around from a mechanical perspective. Now, the ones of us that like rear wheel drive stuff aren't happy about that, but that's just the way it is. Which of the following is not suggested when attempting to identify the source of a manual transaxle and drivetrain noise? The vehicle's owner should be driving. Listen for noise with the vehicle at rest and a clutch engaged. The vehicle should be driven long enough to warm all lubricants, or the technician should be driving.
Technician should be driving.
Yeah, that's not suggested. when attempting. I tell you what I like,
'Cause who knows?
is I like for the owner of the car to drive and tell me what they're talking about. You got me? What are you talking about? I want to hear the noise you're talking about. I don't want to hear the noise that I hear that may not be the same noise. I want to hear the noise you're talking about.
Who's gonna know the car better?
Huh?
Who's gonna know the car better?
The other person that drives it every day
Mhm.
and all that. A customer complains that his or her car is stuck in gear. You identify all of the following as possible causes, except, and this is an ASE style question, A, damaged synchronizer assembly. B, worn internal shifter mechanism. C, a damaged external shifter mechanism. Or D, an obstruction in the case vent tube.
I'd say obstruction in case.
Yeah, a case vent tube obstruction is going to cause it to build pressure and possibly leak oil, but it's not going to cause it not to go in gear. Number 14. While inspecting the transaxle and clutch housing cases during assembly, the service technician notices what appears to be a crack in the transaxle case and some nicks and burrs on the mating surfaces. Which of the following statements is incorrect? Nicks and burrs are common imperfections that will not interfere with normal functioning. Nicks and burrs should be removed with a fine stone or file.
And number 13, I didn't see except.
Huh?
On 13, I didn't see except. It's less than 8.
Oh, you didn't see except down there underneath it. Alloy casting imperfections may appear to be cracks. And case integrity should be checked using a dye penetrant solution.
I'd say
A. Nicks and burrs are common imperfections. When the transmission is in fourth gear, how are the gears engaged? A. Fourth gear is locked to the main shaft and all synchronizers are in their center positions. B. The fourth synchronizer remains in neutral position. C. Third gear is unlocked and fourth gear is locked to the main shaft. D. First gear is locked to the main shaft and third gear synchronizer moves forward.
A. I'd say C.
You get your head wrapped around that. It's not a very hard. Third gear is unlocked and fourth gear is locked to the main shaft. That's what it is. While you're putting it in gear. See, they didn't really word that question right. They say while the transmission is in fourth gear. I would say while it's being placed in fourth gear. Third gear is unlocked and fourth gear is locked to the main shaft. And then to check transaxle lubricant level, what do you do?
Remove the case bolt from the transaxle case.
Excuse me?
Remove the case bolt from the transaxle case.
No, you're actually looking at transaxle lubricant.
Oh, transaxle lubricant. I was thinking.
Transaxle, not transmission, transaxle lubricant.
B.
What you think?
Yeah, we.
Y'all are going to think I'm storying whenever I tell you the true answer to that
It's not
question.
A.
A.
It is A.
Are you serious?
As a matter of fact, if you go out to their little escort and you look down there, right there about where the speedometer cable goes into the transaxle, you'll see on the side of the case that the oil level is supposed to be at the top of that gear. So they basically use on some of these at least, they use the the speedometer gear for the dipstick. Isn't that funny? And that little escort out there uses automatic transmission fluid in the transmission, and it's a manual transmission. And Bobby's got to pull that transmission out and put that plate in there that he left out when he was doing the engine overhaul.
I don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, the person that's not going to have to fix it always knows what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's the person who hadn't noticed it hadn't shown me. I wouldn't know what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, boy,